acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, wherever we are. For me, I'm on Wurundjeri land. We recognise the strength, resilience and capacity of the traditional owners, and we pay our respects to elders past and present, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here with us today. So really grateful to have Alex with us today for this very important topic, and one that we've been keen to get someone to come and talk to us about for quite a long time. So Alex Rosenthal is the branch manager of the Engagement and Inclusion branch at the National Disability Insurance Agency. The Engagement and Inclusion team are responsible for community engagement. They work closely with disability representative organisations and also manage the NDIS inclusion strategies and provide secretariat support to the NDIA reference and advisory groups. Alex has been with the NDIA for almost 10 years and has worked across a number of roles and teams, including on self-management policy. So just in terms of the session tonight, Alex is going to take us through a PowerPoint presentation, which is going to focus mainly on the recent changes to NDIS policies and rules, and then we'll open up for Q&A after that. And if there's any burning questions that come up for you as you go, then just perhaps pop them in the chat as we go. It's just me tonight. Alison Mackay-Meyer is travelling back from Sydney via Gosford. She's on a work-related trip related to her rareware business, so just me. Terrific. So Alex, over to you to start.
Thank you so much, Alison, and lovely to meet everybody. Thank you for having me today, or tonight. I'm just trying to share my screen as I talk. Can't do two things at once. Hopefully people can see my purple slides. Feel free to interrupt me as we go. As Alison said, I'm going to provide a bit of an overview of some reforms, and then happy to take questions at the end, or if I've been too heavy with the jargon throughout this presentation, feel free to jump in and ask any clarifying questions. I'll talk for about 20 minutes. I'll move relatively quickly through my slides. I'd rather have a conversation, particularly because we're a small group. I'd rather get to the bits that you want to talk about sooner rather than later. So as you all know, the scheme is changing. A few years ago now, there was an independent review into the NDIS, and there were a number of recommendations made. As a result of that review and those recommendations, the NDIS Act was updated last year, and a few things changed in the Act. I'll talk about some of them today, but happy to answer questions on anything else that I might not cover. Some of the changes took effect right away from October last year. Others have been progressively implemented throughout the course of this year, and the most significant changes are yet to come and will continue to be delivered over the next 5 years. We are working with people with disability, participants, their families, supporters and advocates to design these changes to the NDIS. We have a significant co-design and engagement program underway, and so many of these reforms are yet to be fully designed and are still subject to design and testing and advice from our community. At the moment, we are actively co-designing 4 key aspects of the reforms. First is the assessment and budgeting approach. So this includes the support needs assessment that will be introduced over the next few years, and a much more flexible approach to budgeting. We're also thinking about the participant experience and co-designing a number of improvements to how we work directly with participants. The NDIS review recommended the design of a new function to help people navigate the scheme and also the other systems and supports available to people with disability. So we're currently consulting and engaging and co-designing on what the function of a navigator will look like. And we're designing and implementing quite a considerable program of safeguarding improvements to help keep participants safe. We're also currently consulting on an early intervention pathway for children younger than 9, and a number of other legislation and reforms and projects that I'm happy to talk more about. What has changed? I'm going to spend a few moments talking about what has already changed and what you might already be experiencing as a result of these reforms. The first is funding periods. Funding periods is a new concept. It was introduced in the Act, and the intent is to provide much longer plans in the future, up to 5 years, and funding periods allow us to then make funding available at shorter periods of time. So the longest funding period you can have in a plan is 12 months. The shortest funding period you can have is 1 month, although there are very limited circumstances in which that would be applied. The funding period is the length of time funding is made available. And so if you have a 12-month plan, you might have 3 or 4 funding periods. You might have 1 funding period if your plan is relatively small. And so it's about how the funding is released in your plan. What changed? Funding periods used to always be 12 months. Plans used to generally only be 12 months, and by default, all of the plan funding periods were 12 months. Even when the Act changed in October last year, our systems took a while to update, and so we did not start introducing shorter funding periods until May this year. And so now, as the plan is reassessed or updated, reviewed, a plan might have shorter funding periods applied. We introduced this for lots of different ways, different reasons. As I said, funding periods help us provide longer term plans. They also help safeguard participants from financial exploitation and make sure that not all of the funding is taken right away. And we heard lots of feedback over the last 10 years about, particularly from self-managers and particularly people who might have significant sized plans, about breaking that up into shorter periods. One of the other key changes is related to the plan management rule. In this section, I'm going to talk about plan management in a way that is used to describe all 3 different types of plan management arrangements you can have in your plan. So that includes self-management, that includes using a registered plan manager, and also agency managed, which is where you only purchase your supports from registered providers. So there were some changes to the plan management rule. That means what is a rule? A rule is a rule that's established under the NDIS Act. It requires the agency to do things. In this case, it requires us to think about certain things when we make a decision. So if a participant asks to self-manage their plan or use a registered plan manager, we have to consider the risks to them, the risks to the scheme, and we have to make sure we're protecting them from harm. We have to make sure the funding is used in the right way. And the rule and the Act still require us to consider and support participant choice and control. So that means if someone does ask for plan management or self-management, then we have to do our best to make sure that that can happen. The updated rule explains better what unreasonable risk is and how we consider whether or not unreasonable risk exists. We previously had this guidance in our self-management policy that now has been put in an actual rule. And we also have to consider if a participant is going to spend their funds appropriately. When we make a plan management decision, so when we decide whether or not someone can self-manage or use a registered plan manager, we are required to also consider if that person is currently bankrupt or insolvent, if they have a criminal history that included prison time or included a crime involving fraud or dishonesty. We have to consider risk, and that is, as I mentioned, that's defined a little bit more in the rule than it ever has been before. And we also think about whether or not they're spending their money in the right way. The next change is eligibility reassessments. The change that was made to eligibility reassessments are now in the process. We provide 90 days to respond to a request for information as part of an eligibility reassessment. Previously, when an eligibility reassessment commenced, participants only had 28 days to provide that evidence. Under the new Act, we were able to extend that to 90 days. And we have received lots of feedback about how we can improve eligibility reassessments. And so we've been running a significant program of consultation and co-design about how we make it a better experience for participants. And as a result, we've designed better letters, better correspondence, better conversations that we have with participants going through this process. We make sure that we always tell participants why an eligibility reassessment has started. We provide clear information about how they can provide evidence, and we make sure that they know that they have 90 days to provide this information, and we can also provide more than 90 days if they're waiting for appointments and reports to provide to us. Another key change that was introduced earlier this year from January was the provision of impairment information. What does that mean? It means that if you are new to the scheme, if you have applied to access the scheme from January this year, along with your letter that says you are now a participant, you have met access, you'll also get better information about how you have met access criteria. This will include whether or not you have met the early intervention criteria or the permanent and significant disability criteria, and which impairment categories outlined in the Act you have met access for. This was a recommendation by the review. It was also something that advocates told us were really important. They wanted to make sure that the agency was being really transparent in how it made our decisions, and so now we provide much clearer information. This includes, as I said, the categories of impairments that relate to how the person has met their access, and if they're a young child, whether that has been because of a developmental delay diagnosis. If you're an existing participant, if you were already on the scheme before January this year, this doesn't affect you. Impairment information is only being provided to new participants. We are not yet we haven't worked out yet how to deliver it well for existing participants. That is something we are working on at the moment through co-design. Lots of people have told us they do not want it to be stressful. They do not want to have to provide extra information. And so we're working out a way that we can make it as easy as possible to give that information to existing participants without causing stress and anxiety. So nothing has changed yet for existing participants. They will get that information over time. And finally, the other significant change that you will have started experiencing already is the new definitions of what is and is not an NDIS support. When the Act changed last year, we introduced some rules about what is considered an NDIS support. As part of these rules, there are 3 lists. The first list defines what is an NDIS support and therefore what you can spend your NDIS funding on. The second list is a list of things that are not considered NDIS supports and therefore things you cannot purchase with your funding. And then there's a very small list about things that we're calling replacement supports, that are things that are generally not things we would fund and purchase. However, in some specific circumstances we might. And so there's a process to go about applying for a replacement support. Oh, I've gone too far. How do I go back? So some examples of things that are NDIS supports that we fund that you can continue to purchase are, of course, assistance with daily personal activities, early intervention supports for children, and supports for employment. We also continue to fund transport supports, participation in community and social activities, home modifications, mobility equipment, assistive technology. These are all things that are still considered NDIS supports. You can see the full list on our website. An example that I often get asked about is therapies. The lists talk about evidence-based therapy as something that is an NDIS support. And examples of this include therapeutic supports that help participants improve or maintain functional capacity in areas such as language and communication. So you might work with a speech therapist. Mobility and movement, you might work with a physiotherapist, exercise physiologist, those types of physical therapies. Interpersonal interactions, functioning and community living. The delivery of these therapeutic supports is generally by an allied health professional, and is absolutely something that is still funded under the NDIS. I've used the term evidence-based therapeutic supports a little bit. We generally define evidence-based therapeutic supports as those delivered by an appropriately qualified allied health professional. This means your allied health professional has their qualifications and is registered with their professional association. However, I get lots of questions about the use of games, Dungeons and Dragons, animals in therapy. And so I wanted to make a distinction between someone calling something animal therapy and that being about just engaging with the animal, and a service that is delivered by an appropriately skilled allied health professional that involves activity with an animal. And so a good example is, a child might use speech therapy. The speech therapist might use a board game or a storytelling device like Dungeons and Dragons to help as a therapeutic mechanism. That is something that is absolutely still allowed and can be purchased with NDIS supports. Early intervention for children is something that is still funded under the NDIS. I know many of you will have heard Minister Butler's announcement last week about the new Thriving Kids program. That has not been designed or delivered yet, and so early intervention supports are still delivered by the NDIS for the time being, and much more work has to be done before there are any changes in that regard. Support coordination. There's been lots of conversations about support coordination, so I thought I would touch on this specifically. The NDIS review did make some recommendations about support coordination. However, support coordination has not changed at this point in time. NDIS funds can still be used to purchase support coordination. We know that there are lots of brilliant support coordinators supporting families and participants out there at the moment. That is continuing. You can continue to use your funding to access support coordination. What is not an NDIS support? So under the lists of things that are not considered NDIS supports, there are 15 broad categories of goods and services. These are the things that we do not fund and cannot be purchased using NDIS funding. Examples on this list include things that are the responsibility of state or local government or another community service. Examples are education, health, justice, etc. Things that are not related to a person's disability, things that are not evidence-based, things that relate to day-to-day living costs, such as rent or groceries, things that cause harm or potential cause harm to the participant or other people. And we specifically are not able to fund sexual services, alcohol or drugs or any other kind of illegal activities or services. An example of things that are not NDIS supports are alternative therapies, things like cuddle therapy, reflexology, and alternative and complementary medicines. I mentioned replacement supports. In some cases, we can support participants to use their funding to purchase things that would ordinarily be considered something that we would not fund, but may be right for them. An example is someone with physical disability may apply to purchase something like a robot vacuum because that is a cheaper and better option for them than having pay for a cleaner to come in. And so there are a small number of things that are on the replacement support lists that you can apply to access specifically. I'll talk briefly about flexibility in plans. You all probably know this, but I'll go relatively quickly. But there are different budgets within an NDIS plan. There's the core support budget. This is generally the most flexible, and it's designed for day-to-day supports, things you might need every day. It includes personal care, assistance with daily living, and can be used flexibly to purchase these types of supports that suit your needs. So you might have different patterns across a year, you might have different supports at different times, and there's flexibility within that budget to allow for those arrangements to be set up. Capacity building supports, this includes funding for support coordination, it includes therapy budgets in most cases, things like disability related health supports might be included in this. They might also be included in core supports. Capacity building supports are generally designed to help participants build skills, increase independence, and are generally stated. So there is less flexibility in this budget. When I say stated, I mean that we will say you have this amount of money to spend on therapy, and generally cannot spend kind of more from other parts of your budget on therapeutic supports. Capital supports, that is the purchase of higher cost AT, so assistive tech. So that is wheelchairs, that might be assistive communications devices, vehicle modifications, home modifications, and also specialist disability accommodation falls within this category. All capital supports are stated and are generally based on a quote, a specific amount of money for a one-off purchase in most cases. And then the last category is recurring supports. These are for transport funding. Transport funding is provided directly to participants who are eligible for transport funding. So that is cash that is paid into their bank accounts on a regular basis. As I mentioned, the most flexible part of our budget is your core support categories. This means that you can buy supports from other flexible support categories as long as they're set up in the same way. So they're all self-managed or they're all plan managed. And stated supports mean that these supports are not flexible. It means you must use this funding in the way that it is described. To understand your plan, there will be descriptions from the delegate, from the planner who built the plan. You can also request a budget breakdown, which is kind of like the maths homework, the workings out on how the delegate got to your plan budget. It doesn't mean you have to spend your funding that way, but it can be a useful tool. So that's absolutely something you can ask for as well. That's where I'm going to leave it.